Hello. So I'm going to be doing, this is going to be a 3-book review of, this isn't the entire series, but I thought that the other 2 books were a little overkill, in my opinion. So I decided that I'm just going to do it for the 3 books that I liked the most of this series. It's called the Dollanganger Series by V.C. Andrews. It's Garden of Shadows, which is a prequel to Flowers in the Attic, and then Petals on the Wind, which is a sequel to that book. Now, throughout this entire series, all I wanted to know was what happens to the kids, what happened before the whole Flowers in the Attic story, and what happened afterwards. That's all I really wanted to know. I didn't need to know about their, her children and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what, there was 2 other books. There was If There Be Thorns and Seeds of Yesterday. Now, I'll go into that after I'm done with the 3 books that I'm going to do reviews on. Okay, so the first one is Garden of Shadows. Okay, so this book is, like I said before, it's a prequel to Flowers in the Attic. It talks about Olivia and Malcolm Foxworth, who are the grandparents in Flowers in the Attic. And it talks about how they met, different things that happened during their marriage. They came to Foxworth Hall, and she was mistress of Foxworth Hall. They had 2 boys. And then Malcolm talks about him and his issues, and then apparently there was an affair with his stepmother, and her name was Alicia, and that's how Corinne was born. I think so. I think it was Corinne, but I can't remember. But yeah, so it talks about them, and it talks about after their children were born and what happens to their children. And it pretty much gives you a background story to Flowers in the Attic. So, and it's really, it's full of like hate and, it's like there's love and there's hate and there's betrayal and there's just coldness, and there's a little bit of incest. Well, if you consider incest, a little bit of that, and then just disownment and all that kind of stuff. So I would suggest reading that first. V.C. Andrews didn't write it until after she wrote Petals on the Wind. That's when she wrote Garden of Shadows. So that's Garden of Shadows. It's just a background of leading up to Flowers in the Attic. So now, Flowers in the Attic. Flowers in the Attic is about, obviously, if you've seen the movie, you kind of get the idea. It's about Corinne and her husband Christopher. They have 4 children together. They have a set of twins, a girl. The boy was first, and they had a girl, just Christopher and Kathy. Then they had the twins, Corey and Carrie. Now, it talks about them, and at the beginning of the book, the father dies, so they end up having to go to Foxworth Hall, which is her mother and her father's home. And they end up having to stay in a room upstairs where it goes into the attic. And they have to stay there. They can't open the curtains. They can't, draw attention to themselves. Whenever the maids come to clean that area of rooms, they have to go up into the attic and be as quiet as possible and all that kind of stuff. And their grandmother gives them, like a set of rules that they have to abide by. Like, they're not supposed to, boys have to sleep in one bed, girls in the other. They can't look at the opposite sex, as in, like, all that kind of stuff, yeah. so it talks about the children and what happens to them and how their grandmother treats them, and pretty much how they start to, they're always asking when they're going to be able to come out, and the mother is always like, oh, soon, soon, soon. And then they find out later about what happened to the grandfather and why, and what's going on with the mother, you know, and then one of the children dies, and it's just, and they find out how they die, and it's very tragic, and it's got a little bit of incest in that too, if you can imagine. And then it talks about them leaving and stuff like that. It doesn't really go into much about what happens after they leave. It just says that they leave and blah, blah, blah. So that's Flowers in the Attic. I would definitely check it out if you like that kind of stuff. Okay, so now on to Cassie and their relationship, and she ends up taking, because she was in ballet. She was a ballet dancer before they went to their grandmother's house. So she starts dancing again, and she becomes like this famous ballerina, and she meets a man that is the son of her teacher, her ballet teacher, and talks about their relationship and what happens to them. And then after she has a couple of children, and it talks about who the fathers are and all that kind of stuff, and what happens to them afterwards, and what ends up, and how, and it also talks about how the mother gets found out, that they find out that, you know, these are her children, because if you've seen the movie, you know that she was trying to, whenever she was getting married or whatever, she was trying to deny the fact that they were her children. So it talks about how she gets found out, and what happens to the grandmother after that, and what happens to their mother's husband, and everything like that. So that was Petals on the Wind. It pretty much talks about a conclusion. In my opinion, it should have been a conclusion, because I started reading, okay, the book after that was If There Be Thorns. Now, when I started reading it, I was like, oh, you know, cool, If There Be Thorns, there's more into the story. But then I started reading it, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is a little bit overkill. So if you want to read the entire series, there's 5 books. There's Garden of Shadows, Flowers in the Attic, Petals on the Wind, If There Be Thorns, and Seeds of Yesterday. The last 2 books, in my opinion, are a little bit overkill, like I said. But the first 3, like, it could have just been a trilogy. It could have been the Dollanganger trilogy, and it would have been fine. And it wouldn't have been, you know, it's just, after that, I thought it was just kind of over it, and I was just like, okay, no, that's enough.